Look, it's absolutely no secret that the media is completely partisan. From failing to cover the damage done on the attacks of 5/29/2020, when rioters, BLM Antifa, attacked and attempted to step fire to a guard post at the White House, attempted to burn down a historic church in Washington, D.C., and brutalized and injured many local officers, and forced the Secret Service to bring President Trump to a secure area of the White House. Have you heard about it? No, of course not. Also, what about the 100 days straight of rioting that were framed as mostly peaceful protests? Just look at the coverage of Kyle Rittenhouse, who they say crossed state lines with a rifle and had no business in Kenosha, and how he killed peaceful black protesters at a BLM rally, when in fact there were massive riots. Oh, and one of his parents happened to live in town. Oh, and it was 20 minutes away from where he resided. And he went there to administer first aid and clean up graffiti, and was given a gun when he got there. And he was attacked by a white child molester and subsequently other whites who tried to kill him. And all the media did was lie, denigrate, misframe, and obfuscate. Meanwhile, in Virginia, around the time that they were getting a fund going for his defense, lost his job because it was discovered that he donated to Kyle's legal defense fund in direct violation of the policeman's First Amendment rights. It was continuous coverage for over a year, demonizing a teenager who defended himself from becoming another Antifa BLM death statistic, from the violent leftist who would be released from prison, no doubt, with no bail. Compare Kyle Rittenhouse's story to that of Darrell Brooks, who used his SUV to run over small children and elderly women who were participating in a parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin, not far from Kenosha. When they discussed it in the news as briefly as they did and could on CNN, on MSNBC, they made it seem as though it was the car which committed the crime, the car which randomly rerouted itself through the parade. Have you heard the name Darrell Brooks since then? This was probably your first refresher of the name in a long, long time. Now, imagine if Darrell Brooks had been a white Republican instead of a BLM supporting black Democrat. The breathless coverage that it would have received. We'd still be hearing about it nonstop. Evil Republican, a threat to our democracy. The unimaginable violence, the hate within their hearts. And compare that to the media coverage of the January 6th Capitol riot and the congressional inquiry that took ages and ages. The lies told, like Officer Brian Sicknick died of blunt trauma from being hit over the head with a fire extinguisher, when in fact, he died of a stroke. The New York Times maintained this reporting for almost a month before eventually silently correcting, whereas local media outlets nailed the story and the truth the following day of his death. All the news that's fit to print, and to think that I used to trust unquestionably the old gray lady. And even with this correction, with the knowledge of what actually took place, it was still included as evidence against Donald Trump in a second impeachment, as well as being mentioned in Joe Biden's latest fascistic address to the nation, where he denigrated MAGA as a threat to democracy. I'll likely return to this point in a moment. And very recently, you had a Las Vegas politician who murdered an investigative reporter. Massive evidence of the crime found within his home. And the police basically have him dead to rights. What's interesting is the minimal amount of coverage that this murder received in the media. Absent from it was the affiliation of the politician, the party affiliation, which of course, mysteriously, was Democrat, absent from the media coverage, deemed to be unimportant. Would it have been treated the same way if it was a Republican politician who had committed the murder? Don't you think that Joe Biden would have included it in his utterly toxic address to the nation? And now you have in North Dakota an 18-year-old run over by a crazed leftist Democrat who specifically stated the reason he ran him down with his SUV, not unlike good old Darrell Brooks, was because he believed the teen to be an extremist Republican. Again, where is the coverage in the New York Times, on CNN.com, on MSNBC? It's completely absent, or at least I was unable to locate it despite perusing each of the web pages for several minutes. Even a search at NewYorkTimes.com for the term North Dakota yielded no result. Look, number one, let's get something straight. These are no longer news services. These are partisan activist organizations making a dollar from the increasingly narrow slice of the pie that represents American media, who are catering to the whims of one group. In this case, partisan leftist Democrats, by presenting them a narrative that they desire to hear. They continue to espouse the manufactured lies about Trump without an apology for Russiagate, the drinking bleach hoax, the fine people on both sides narrative that they ran with and Joe Biden stated was his reason for entering into the presidential race. They reframe stories that don't suit their ideological needs, like blaming the automobile for having the audacity to drive itself through the parade, and the mostly peaceful BLM protest that lasted all summer. The effects: one, completely fracturing the American public based on their source of information, which of course does happen to coincide with their profit motive, keeping the hypnotized returning into the orbit of the partisan website so they can continue feeding their emotionally charged outrage. And secondly, setting us up on a path for civil war. If you want to continue to promote both sides of the political aisle with the idea that the other is evil and a threat to our republic, not a democracy, a republic, we will have escalating tensions that lead to murder based solely on political affiliation, just as we saw yesterday in, unfortunately, North Dakota. Or in Portland last year, when an Antifa member murdered in cold blood a Trump supporter. And eventually, the right is going to react. And believe me, MSNBC and the other leftist rags are going to howl about it nonstop. And unlike the teen in North Dakota, murdered by a leftist Democrat, perhaps a result and function of the stochastic terrorism on full display in Biden's fascistic address to the nation, believe me, you'll hear about it, leading, unfortunately, again, to further polarization. So tell me again, as Donald Trump said, how is the media not the enemy of the people?